Hey folks, it's Samuel Heber from SamuelHeber.net, Samuel Heber on YouTube, Samuel Heber on Facebook, Heber Family Adventures on Instagram. I'm here with Ms. Carr, and she is going to tell us a bit about her story. For those of you who don't know who she is, she has an Instagram, See Me, not ASD, and we're going to learn a bit about her mission. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. I am an attorney in South Florida. I specialize in special education rights. However, I started See Me Not ASD as a initiative to encourage people to see individuals for what makes them exceptional, as opposed to seeing them for their diagnoses, their disabilities, or any significant differences. As you know, ASD tends to be capitalized in most every sentence where it's used. And so I once asked my son when he was younger, I gave him a phrase. I said, "See me, not ASD." And I asked him, how would he write that down? And so our logo is actually designed by him. And that's exactly how he perceived it. And so I thought that was pretty cool, that he sort of has nothing, he had no idea what ASD was at the time, and yet he minimized the capitalization of ASD and capitalized me instead. So I thought that was cool. But my son he's almost 8. He was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when he was 3. And ever since then, we've kind of just been finding creative ways to facilitate and help elevate what makes him exceptional. And my husband and I have 3 other kids in the house, a 12-year-old and twins who are almost 5. And so we really just kind of everything that we do to help our son on the spectrum, we utilize those same skills and tactics and creativity processes for everyone else. So no one in our house is any different or treated any different.
I love that perspective that no one's treated any different because often in ASD families, the child who's on the spectrum often gets most of the attention, which sometimes is warranted because some of our kiddos do need a lot of attention. But I think saying that sets the example that they makes them think the whole world revolves around them when, in fact, no, the world does not evolve around you just because you have autism. It doesn't make you special. What makes you special is you, me, as your movement. As how did you arrive at that conclusion? Because you have other children who are neurotypical, and all of a sudden you have this child who sees the world differently. How are you able to create that balance between treating all your children the same versus my one child who needs some extra help?
So my oldest daughter is my stepdaughter. So my son who was diagnosed, he actually is my firstborn, like physical
Mm.
child. And so he started reading when he was 2, and my husband and I just believed him to be, kind of gifted and exceptional. And when they told us we were trying to put him in preschool and they told us that they think he's on the spectrum, we had no idea what that even meant. And all of a sudden, the doctors, the therapists, the people evaluating him, they started to take away from highlighting anything that made him great, and they only focused on the things that they thought were wrong. And my husband and I kind of promised ourselves that we weren't going to do that. We weren't going to raise him in a way where we only focused on his opportunities for growth. We also wanted to focus on how he learned and how he expressed himself in order to elevate the things that he needed help with. And then when we ended up getting pregnant with twins, it was kind of like, all right, we can do this and we can raise them all the same way, because each of us has our own quirks, our own affinities, our own opportunities. It doesn't matter if you're on the spectrum or not. And so we committed ourselves to that process, and we just a lot of patience and a lot of communication with one another and just a lot of practice.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
and it's not always easy, especially with that. Often other children become very introverted people because they kind of get left to the wayside once that diagnosis comes in. What do you do to make your other children feel heard, even when like your son's in the middle of, I don't know if he has meltdowns or not, but that often can take up a whole day for a lot of parents, and that often creates in siblings, resentment, and which is understandable because like you want mom and dad's attention. Um, do you just one of you take the reign and the other one gives the others attention while you're dealing with that? Like, what would your advice be for parents that are trying to give all your children equal love, even when your autistic child like can demand so much of your attention?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Over the years, I have encouraged all of the kids to be involved in each other's meltdowns. So I have used kind of holistic approaches. I have taught them yoga strategies, breathing strategies, meditation. We play with crystals. We also pray. And, you know, I invite them whenever someone's not feeling emotionally well or they're expressing themselves without words. I invite everyone to come together and help the person who's struggling at that moment. So, for example, if it's my son on the spectrum who's crying and upset, I ask his younger brother, hey, August, do you want to come over and let's try to help Kimani calm down and see what he might need from us. And so we kind of make it interactive. When it's incredibly challenging, I kind of just hold him and I let him know that he has an opportunity to calm down, and when he's ready he can let me know and we can talk. I don't pressure him to necessarily get out of the emotional moment right away. I want him to feel how he's feeling, but I also teach the other kids as they're watching me do that so that they know how to respond on their own if I'm not around right away. And what's really cool is I've seen them grow to the point where if one of them is having a meltdown, I
Mhm.
hear the other one saying, "What do you need? How can I help you?" Very calmly trying to communicate with one another. So it's a lot of that, just inviting them into the moment and showing them that there's nothing wrong with the other person who's feeling that way, but they might need some help to calm down.
I think that's perfect because with ASD, it is a communication difference. I don't like using the word disorder because I don't view it as a disorder because I myself am on the spectrum and I don't view myself as disabled. And inviting your children in through communication, I think, is really great. Like often, I've seen parents like they just push off chores onto their kids while they handle their child, but inviting them to learn how to communicate, like that's a lesson that all children, autistic or not, should learn. Um, what
Absolutely.
hmm and also it allows them to actually understand ASD rather um, than resent their brother for having it, and seeing it as a gift, and it also teaches tolerance, and especially during such a difficult time in the world, tolerance is acceptance is such an important lesson for our children. How do you work with your husband with this? Like, was he on board with you right away, or did he have like, I guess, the typical male response, like I'm gonna be the warrior here and teach my son to be tough, or was he more compassionate?
So funny enough, I'm kind of like the tough one between the two of us. So I'm considered the more strict parent, the one who has a little bit more rules and expectations. He's more the fun, laid back one. So really, I think at first he was hesitant to even believe that there was a diagnosis necessary. Our pediatrician also didn't think that a diagnosis was necessary, and even to this day, he still thinks he's just gifted. But at some point, we sat down and we said, even if there is a diagnosis, it's not harmful to him because it just entitles him to services if he needs extra assistance or if
Mm.
he needs resources. And so we didn't allow the diagnosis to be who he now is. We just let it be something that, if it can help him in the future to obtain anything he needs, then he has it. But in terms of how we handle, you know, things at home, it's really, everyone is their own individual person, and we kind of observe what they like and dislike. We do challenge them to try new things that they might not enjoy, but we do it so that they can really explore and discover what they enjoy the most. and then we build on what they like, and so it's fun.
Hmm. That's really great. Is playing off each other's strengths, and that is really the key to thriving, helping your child on the spectrum is focusing on his strength. As it doesn't, I don't think that doesn't even have to do with the spectrum. It's just as human beings focusing on our strengths rather than forcing something that we are not. The opposite shows up that we want. Like, it's just that's going to create conflict.
Yes.
Um, and for any siblings out there, what would you advise them? Like, if someone sees your autistic son, for example, and like they say something, what's wrong with your brother? Like, what have you taught them to say in response to something like the staring or um, ignorant comments?
Well, I haven't really had to deal with that yet,
Hmm.
except for maybe some incidences at the playground,
Hmm.
where, for example, my son might, instead of wanting to interactive play, he wants to just chase people. Um, but no one's ever really said to my oldest, what's wrong with your brother? They actually just think he's really fun and a genius. So I
Hmm.
haven't encountered it yet, but when I do, I think the advice will simply be, you've seen how we've interacted at home, you see how we elevate one another, and always lead with that. So if you're ever not sure what to say, always start with, you know, you're exceptional, I'm exceptional, we're all exceptional in our own way, and there's nothing wrong with anyone.
Yeah, I love that word elevate because it's much more positive, and I really love all your responses here because like that's what Heroes of Autism is about, is a positive way to approach autism rather than focusing on what your son can't do, uh, rather than saying, oh, it's going to take him a little longer to reach that stage, the developmental stage. Um, so for parents out there that aren't used to such a positive approach to raising their autistic children, like what was your advice how to get there from going from such a devastated point of view to, oh, like my child is a genius and so avant in their own way, in their his or
Yeah.
her own way, like um how would you, if your a girlfriend said, how do you do that, like how would you walk them through that process of elevating their family rather than grieving, because I think they hate therapists say you should grieve for everything your child is not going to be. I'm like, the child's 2 years old. That's where everyone gets diagnosed these days. Like, how do you know what he or
Yeah.
she is going to be at two? Like, two.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I actually started a podcast based on the process that I use. And unfortunately, when COVID happened, I kind of fell off quarter 2 and I wasn't able to record the episodes in tandem with what my plan was. But essentially, I think the first part of the process is evaluating yourself and finding your own awareness about who you are and where your beliefs came from, kind of just assessing but not judging yourself, just seeing, what was your upbringing like, how do you feel about certain topics and certain issues, and just taking notice of yourself and where you are. And then the next step is to understand, broaden your understanding, because without us understanding, you can't take action, you can't be an advocate for anything.
Mhm.
So then you have to start analyzing, what are you willing to be more understanding about? There are some parents, unfortunately, who are just not willing to advocate for their kids the way that they need, whether they're on the spectrum or not. They're not willing to do the work that's required to understand, the changes and the development and the things that might be needed. And if you're not there yet, then you're never going to get to a positive place where you see things differently. It's a lot of mindset work. It's challenging the way that you've always thought and allowing yourself to try new things and think new ways. And then decide you're going to advocate for something and defining what it is that you're going to advocate for.
Mhm.
Are you going to advocate for your kid to always be seen as exceptional? Are you going to encourage people to focus on what makes them great first? And when you make that commitment, then you start to have a vision. You start to be creative in the ways in which you communicate that to others. And then over time, you'll start to let that bleed into everything that you do. And that's it. That's the process. It's just allowing yourself to be aware of where you are, be willing to understand more things, and then find out what you're going to advocate for, and then have a vision and go for it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely huge. Like clear goals, just like our ASD children who need uh, clear rules, schedules, and definitions. I think you as the parent also need that to be clear. You can't, excuse my language, half-ass your way through this. And I think the other thing is like this is the role of a parent, no matter what your child has, autistic or not. They are going to challenge every preconception you've had of what it means to be a parent. I know I've experienced that with my son, who's neurotypical. Who I had this idea in my head what parenting was before he came into the world, and he's flipped that on its head. And I think that's something to be excited about as a parent, even when you get that diagnosis. Is I get to be a parent, still like my child is going to uniquely challenge me, and because you met one person on the spectrum, you met one person on the spectrum. We're just as unique as neurotypical people are, and I think that's a huge thing that I think parents need to get out of their head. That just because you saw like Dateline or some 30-minute episode of something, that's not the definition of autism. Your child makes up the definition as they go along for themselves.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
if I could also say real quick,
mhm,
um, I think it's important. I love the word that you use, excitement, because every day you don't know what you're going to face, whether you're talking about autism related things or going to work or whatever. Everything's, and so to be excited about what the day is going to bring, but to be committed to having a way of seeing it,
mhm,
that's really the difference. If you're committed to seeing somebody for what makes them exceptional, then that's how you'll lead every aspect of your life, even the way in which you see yourself,
mhm.
you know so
Yeah, exactly. Because your child is a reflection of you. And that's one thing I always tell parents, that as someone special, that we are listening, we are watching. Throw making eye contact out of the window. Just because we're not making eye contact doesn't mean we're not watching and learning from you, no matter where your child falls on the spectrum. And there is a bit of you in your autistic child. You just got to know where to look, and that's sharing activities. And from your Instagram, I saw you do yoga with them and sharing your passions with them, because that makes your autistic child feel included. Speaking from someone who is on the spectrum, we want to feel included. We may not verbalize it. We may not. Our body language may say the opposite, but we do appreciate when someone says, "Hey, you want to try the tree pose or with me today, or some calming yoga pose?" Like just to feel included. We want the same things as every person on this planet wants to do, is feel included. Um,
yeah.
and that leads me to, speaking of yoga, like how do you get an autistic child to do yoga? Because like I've done yoga, and a lot of it is just standing in one small area, and it's hard for a child, autistic or not, to do. Just sit there or stand there or do these. Because how do you get him to stay in one spot?
So he doesn't necessarily stay in one spot, but we use the bubble analogy. So I tell all my kids that we each have our own bubble around us. And so long as you're remaining in your own bubble, that's your sacred space. And so if you move that bubble around, that's fine. Just make sure that your bubble isn't getting into somebody else's bubble. So
Mm,
basically, if you want to be over there, then you're in your bubble, practicing in your bubble, in your space. Just don't enter anyone else's space unless you ask permission. So that's one thing. The other thing is, a lot of yoga has been portrayed as being like this religiously connected body process where you do real funky, crazy things upside down and all of that. But to me and to us, in the way that I teach my kids, yoga is about feeling how you feel and taking notice of it and allowing yourself to learn new ways to make your body feel different things. and also a lot of breathing and laughter, and a lot of belly laughs, and just being happy in the space that you're in for however long you can stand to be in it. So if he can only do 5 minutes, that's great. Even if it's just sit and close your eyes for 5 minutes, that's yoga.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and why it is so important for parents to recognize like this. Yes, there is a religious component to yoga, but for autistic people, the more important aspect is not the religious aspect; it's about connection to the body, because ASD people really struggle with that body awareness, which where our gross motor skills, our fine motor skills, being able to tell how our body is affecting our mood, or affecting other people's mood, and having a bubble, which I'm guessing is arm's length. If you can twist your arms without hitting anyone, that's your bubble. For
yes,
anyone who needs a clear definition of what a bubble is when it comes to yoga. Um, and what is cool is like anyone can do it, even if your child is in a wheelchair. There are yoga poses they can do, because some autistic people have cerebral palsy as well, and they're just limited due to their fine gross motor skills. Like they can sit down even, if they want to, and do a relaxing pose and breathing and belly laughs. Um, and it's just a way to connect and build confidence. Like that's, I think, the heart of what yoga really is. It's about being connected to who you are and building that confidence. And it doesn't have to be 30, 40 minutes. It can be 5 minutes, 3 minutes, or even if the shot can only last 30 seconds. Like that's a place to start.
yeah.
Um, so let's talk a bit more about. We talked a lot about your son. Let's talk about you. Like, was he your inspiration to get into as a lawyer into special education law, or were you already before he was even born? Like, this is my passion.
Now, and this area of law tends to be filled with people who end up having personal experiences. And so that's what happened to me. I was a criminal defense lawyer prior to that. But then we had an incident at his school, his former school, and they wrote him up for something that he had no control over, right? Body function. And I just thought to myself, at least I know the law. At least I know how to fight this and make sure that he gets what he needs. But there are so many parents who don't know that they have rights on behalf of their children. And that scared me because there's so many wonderful, exceptional kids in the world who are getting missed because their parents aren't aware of what resources they have to access and tap into. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, and that's how I've gotten into this field because of my own personal experiences. I was tired of people speaking on behalf of me, and I wanted to help parents educate them on the rights that they have, and people on the spectrum the rights that they do have, which is the right any human being has, the right to thrive and live and be accepted without discrimination. So how was that transition as a lawyer from staring down the face of like I don't know, murderers or thieves to like shrew school district people that didn't get children like your son? Like, what was that transition like for you as a lawyer?
So in my criminal defense work, I was a litigator. So I was always in court, always in trial, always in hearings. This area of law is mostly in conference rooms with, among educators and administrators. And that's, I think it's actually easier for me because I started kind of at the more rigid area of practicing law. I would say, though, the most exciting part about it is that each case is different because every child is different and every child has different needs.
Hmm.
And I try to approach it as a collaborative approach. So I encourage everyone at the table to not see me as a threat, but to see me as someone who's just there to make sure that we're collaborating and really focusing on the individual needs, not,
Hmm.
what you've done for Johnny and Sarah and, everybody else. I need to know what you understand about how this child thinks and feels and learns, and then build on what their exceptionalities are in order to build their plan.
Yeah, I think that's great. Again, you're focusing on each individual child's strengths rather than I'm the big scary lawyer. Which makes educators probably more willing to work with you rather than some woman that came in like in a business suit and like dropped the lawyer hammer on the table and it, they describe it. But I'm sure there are times where you have to drop the hammer. Like, how do you, as a lawyer in those conference room, know, okay, it's time to drop the hammer versus let me gently ease you guys into what's going to happen here? Like, how do you tell the situation calls for?
So I like to start off by assessing everyone's demeanor in the room. And now it's over Zoom conferencing. So it's a little more challenging because you don't get to see everyone's body language.
Hmm.
But I listen to little nuances in the way that they describe the child. And I look for willingness to change their perspective. So if I see that they're giving me a lot of pushback and they're known to everything, then that's a red flag for me. So that tells me I need to be a little more alert in terms of looking to see if they're going to do something that is illegal and harmful to the child's education. But usually, I think most people want to work with you. They want things to be better for the parent's experience and the child's experience. And so sometimes it's a lot of negotiation.
Hmm.
But I haven't actually had to get to the point where I'm suing school districts because at least up till now, people are willing to make changes
Hmm.
and see what will work differently. So hopefully I won't ever have to do that,
Right.
but I'm sure
Yeah,
I
I get
will.
it. Because I used to work in education myself. Like, I know how small our budgets are. Like most schools can't survive a single lawsuit. So it's much easier to actually sit down and negotiate on behalf of the child rather than be a stubborn mule about it.
Right.
Um, and how do you deal with the child's parents who like really want this thing and you're just like, I'm sorry that just you're asking that it's too much and they're like, but they're just not listening to you. Like, um, how do you deal with like really difficult parents that you probably understand as a parent, like, yeah, I would love to have those things too, but just you're asking for the moon and stars when let's just ask for you know a little something rather than.
Well, I try to think very creatively, strategies that will not make the district say no, but will still enable the child to make progress
Hmm.
and to be challenged. I never want goals to be easy. I want them to be challenging for the children because they're capable of anything,
Right.
and we need to show them that we're willing to challenge them, not just to make things easy. But I usually parents, they start off like you're describing, very rigid, very, I want this, I need this. But I show them the difference between, I kind of do a comparison between what the law says and what creative strategies exist. And
Hmm.
then I show them kind of how to meet in the middle. So sometimes I'm negotiating with parents too, the same
Hmm.
way I'm, negotiating with districts. But
Hmm.
I also encourage parents to describe what they do at home. I ask them to keep journals, keep track of things that work and don't work. And so sometimes it's a long, drawn out process because they have never done that. No one's ever asked them to make those notes and to try new things and to get creative, you know?
Right.
So it's a lot of that. But
Yeah.
to be open to possibility.
Yeah. Open the possibilities, and I think that's the hugest blessing of autism is that your child is not going to get the typical education. Actually, they get I think, better education than our typical child because they get therapy, so that they learn to be empathetic and they learn about their own mental health. Like neurotypical children aren't taught that; they're taught just to memorize facts. But in ASD schools, your child's being focused on training them to be a human being, not just a cog in the machine, which I always find beautiful. I always tell parents myself, like, your child's being taught how to be human, not a robot. Um,
Right.
and I think the other
And
big
don't
part of
you,
it,
just going to say to that, oftentimes the things that the strategies that they want to teach kids on the spectrum, they should be teaching to all children. And I think you mentioned that before.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem with the school system at this point, is all of those strategies aren't being taught to all kids.
Mhm. In your opinion, why do you think that is? That like why are neurotypical children being ignored, and why are ASD children, given this privilege of learning to be a good human being?
Well, I think the way that you describe how, because sometimes the way it's perceived is that they are trying, like that children on the spectrum are being taught to meet the standard of what society expects them to be at, right?
Hmm.
And so there's an assumption that if you're not on the spectrum, you're already on your way there. And it's just a wrong assumption. It truly is.
Hmm.
And you're right. The kids who aren't on the spectrum are getting left behind too, because they're
Hmm.
not receiving the same access. And
Hmm.
it creates a divide, because now this is where the diversity conversation comes, is because people who aren't on the spectrum aren't taught the same things. So they look at the kids who are receiving those things as being disabled or having something wrong with them, when
Hmm.
really everyone should just be learning together those strategies and understanding one another's diversities as exceptional qualities
Right.
that make them different.
Exactly. And I think what you're doing with your children is exactly what parents are probably asking at this point who are watching it. Well, what do we do if the school districts aren't willing to teach our children this? Well, involving them in what you're teaching your ASD children, like you do, is exactly how you teach them to be
Yeah.
a good human being. Because that's the focus of getting to that standard. Because like that standard, like no, not everyone meets it, and not everyone meets it at the same time. And helping your
Correct.
children realize, oh, you'll get there. Just it takes a little time. Is I think the fundamental principle of being a parent or an educator. Uh, it allows your children to know that they're seen, and allows them to notice, oh, I struggle with this, but there are ways to learn and get better. Um, and I think that's really a huge thing. So if parents are in need of a lawyer and they can't fly down to Florida to hire you, what should they be looking for in a lawyer that is in your position? Like, should they get like a very tough lawyer or more empathetic? Like, what should they be looking for in the character of a lawyer in their hometown?
So this is a unique area of law because there are advocates who are non-lawyers, and that's very different. Like, you don't have criminal advocates who are non-lawyers, helping defendants. But here, you can be a special education advocate without having a bar license. You just can't give legal advice. So the first thing I would suggest is there are parents who want to go with the advocate because it's less expensive. Um, and it's someone who takes the more empathetic approach, I think, usually. However, the benefit to having the lawyer is that they are allowed to tell you about the law and interpret the law for you and advise you on the law, which makes them the stronger resource. Now, the law, I can help people in other states because it's based on special education is based on federal law. However, the difference comes is state laws can offer more protection
Mm.
than the federal laws. So what I can't do is advise on each state's different laws, and so that's where the difficulty comes from me being able to help other people in other states. However, I would say if they're going to be looking for anyone, whether it's an advocate or a lawyer, they should look for someone who is willing to listen,
Mm.
who values collaboration, who is not just quick to say, okay, we're going to sue the school, because that's never a good way to enter the room,
Mhm.
and someone who wants to get to know the child first and who asks questions that let you know they're looking to see what makes your child exceptional, and not just asking questions about, well, what's wrong? How has your child not succeeded? How are they failing? Those things. You want someone who's going to focus on the exceptionalities first.
Mhm. I think you put it exactly. Is like they just see your child not as like a bag of money or because I've seen that as a former educator, like the parents that will sue over every little thing just because they start seeing, and then they take their child out of school, go to another school, and keep this chain. And that what does that teach your child? That the only value is to make their parents money, and that's just horrible. So if they're, I think you're right. If the advocate or lawyer is talking more about money than your child, then that probably is not the right fit. You want them to be focused on like, what does your child need? How can I help? Like that's what to look for, and to look for those red flags or good flags. What's a good flag? Green flag? That expression always confuses me. Uh, anyway, yeah, I think that's excellent advice. It's like it is about the children ultimately, and when you're focused uh, on the child, it keeps it about it allows them to see themselves as human. But when you're arguing about what you want rather than what your child wants or needs, speaking as an ASD person, that makes us feel less than human. But they see you fighting for them as a human being, like that's what makes us feel equal and human. Like you as a parent can express it. And as a parent myself, I can express that I want my child to be seen as equal, not less or more than another child. Like I want equal opportunity, and this is how we do it: is focus on the humanity, not the diagnosis. Uh, and then what I like to say on the show, my favorite phrase I've come up with so far is autism is a community, not a diagnosis. Because where else
Yeah,
in
I
the world
love that.
where else do you see like someone like you like put on the battle armor or yoga pants and like go for it, go for it, and wrap in a very individualistic society. Like as soon as they hear that diagnosis, like this whole Avengers team comes and helps your child. And I would encourage parents to see that as beautiful, that there are people like Miss Carter here or myself that are just willing to help just because we want we want to see your child as a human being, and we want to help the world see your child as a human being, and that's what you gotta look for when you're looking for this kind of help. So I always like to end my interviews with the following question: if you could change the way the world sees autism in one way, what would it be and why?
That's a hard question.
Mm,
Um, I would say that I would like the world to see autism not as capital letters. I would like to see it as lowercase letters. Um, and it's because I think that, for example, in an email, they say you're never supposed to capitalize all letters because the people will think you're yelling at them.
mm,
And I feel similar about ASD always being capitalized in everything because it's almost like you're yelling about this diagnosis and this disorder, and you're focusing so much on the one thing that all of a sudden changes, that you think changes the person. But by minimizing it to lowercase letters, we're saying we're not going to focus on that so much. We're just going to see the individual for who they are. And
mhm.
so I think that's what I would change.
All right, awesome. I think that's the hugest thing is like you hit the nail on the head yet again. That if you make autism a big deal, then it's a big deal. But if you make who your child is, like their name is their actual label. Samuel,
Yeah.
your son, like that, his name should be the first thing that you see with a capital, not ASD.
Yes.
And I know there's a huge argument in education, like on how you write that. Do you start with ASD? No, start with the child's name, who that child is, and their strengths. And that's what I think you're doing. And then I think that's the way we move forward with autism rather than going backwards with it, and how we end the stigma. So before I let you go, I just remember you said you had a podcast. Can you tell the folks a bit about your podcast, where they can start listening to episodes? What why they what's the content like?
Yeah. So each episode can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I think it's on Google as well. I also have a YouTube channel where I post the videos, and the handle is Seemenotasd, Seemenotasd, for all platforms. And essentially, I try for every episode to be less than 30 minutes. and it's conversational. I start with a question, and then I go through some really important things to consider. And then at the end, I challenge people to put into action what they're learning and try to do it in their daily lives.
That's awesome. Well, folks, you gotta definitely check out her podcast, and I think like Heroes of Autism, it sounds like another very positive place to be, and that's how you help get there to elevate, as Ms. Carter has put it. You listen to people that are already elevated, that are already there, or further along the rabbit hole than you are, and that's how we will end the stigma towards autism, is going down the rabbit hole of positivity rather than down the rabbit hole of fear. Um, and that's how we're going to change the way the world sees people like myself or her son, or like you who was watching like your children. Um, all right. Thank you so much for coming on my show. Folks, it's been another great episode
Yeah.
of Heroes of Autism. I hope to catch you on the flip side for the next episode, whenever that may be. All right. Thank you, Ms. Carter, for coming on the show. I learned a lot. All right, folks, this has been another one. Sam Heber out.